Hi MSPs, and welcome to It's 501 Somewhere. I'm Kris Blackmon, your host, and I'm sitting here with Joe Alapat, CEO of Liongard. Welcome.
Hi there, Kris. How you doing?
Cheers. Good. How are you?
Good. I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here.
We thought that we'd sit down and talk with Joe about something that's kind of on the minds of every MSP that's trying to grow their business and their client base, and that's scaling.
Yeah, no, I always joke that because I operated an MSP myself in my past life, and this is the result of all of that hard work, and it's it's definitely stressful as you're trying to scale the organization because you're trying to drive a relationship with a customer that needs to be high touch, and you're fostering these long-term relationships, but at the same time you're providing fairly complex service, and so that's where the scaling issue comes in. Like, how do you, bring on a customer, know everything about the way their IT runs, and then maintain it on an ongoing basis, and then keep showing value. When you're scaling, you want to add new customers, right? And you're at the same time trying to do that efficiently. But there's the beginning of the journey has this huge hill that you have to cross to get to know that customer and get to know their environment. And so there's a celebration when sales closes a deal, and then you'll hear this from the onboarding team because they're like, oh my God, here comes another big puzzle that we have to uncover and figure out what's going on there.
So what are some of the kind of specific areas? One of the things that so many people quote whenever they're talking about operational inefficiencies is level one techs having to spend all their days resetting passwords or things like that. So what are some of the specific areas that MSPs are bleeding profit because they're not being efficient?
Yeah, so honestly, I think one of the biggest topics is that almost everything, if we're talking about a level one tech, involves remoting into a system. And the interaction with the customer begins with, it could be the CEO of that customer calling, and they expect their MSP to know everything about them. But the help desk individual, the level one, is picking up that phone, and they do need some level of situational awareness to go, okay,
right,
this is so and so. This is the they have a user ID in this system, and having that knowledge at their fingertips is extremely helpful. But a lot of times what happens is you have either outdated information, or you're left, let me put you on hold, I'm going to go remote in, and then let me try and figure out what's going on. And it's a discovery process, all the while the customer is waiting. And so the way that we think about that is, well, how can you gain visibility? How does that level one staff member have the ability to know the moment that customer has called? It's like, okay, well, let me pull up this information and trust the information that they have readily available to be able to say, yeah, Mr. Customer, I got you. I know that X, Y, and Z is here. Let me see if I can figure this out, and then get you back up and running, right?
So about what is the size either of the MSP or the number of devices or users that MSP is managing, where they really start to run up against that, when you're young and you've got 2 clients and then you sign 2 more and you've doubled your client size, that's not nearly as big of a deal as, if you have 15 and double them or whatever. So kind of what's that threshold that you see a lot of MSPs who are trying to scale up hitting?
We see this inflection point somewhere between 15 to 25 customers, like that range is this inflection point that we've seen where the focus starts to shift away from, oh wow, I used to be able to do this with tribal knowledge or have so-and-so be the expert at this thing, and I need to start putting systematic processes into place because people do need to take vacations. And you do have to deal with new staff members coming in and onboarding them to learn about the environment. So to me, the magic number is somewhere between 15 to 25.
You can't just put the phone on hold anymore and be like, hey Joe, what's going on with ABC client?
No, I mean, there's been some fun interactions we've done where we've done presentations with customers where it's the onboarding process is stuck in a notepad document where someone has taken notes and somebody else is picking up the phone, the level one. And there's a sense of frustration because that level one wants to be a hero, wants to be there and do their thing, but they're relying on other team members to also follow processes and get things set up properly. So yeah, the answer to that is somewhere between 15 to 25. And then past that, there's other inflection points that we see, that the 50 to 75 range and so on and so forth, where these customers really start to behave differently, and they start to think about automation very, very differently, or treat it as more and more of a priority to help them to solve some of these problems.
Well, I'm glad you brought up automation, because that's one of the things that all the vendors are trying to talk about. As we were talking about before we started rolling, the talent gap is really not helping with the ability for MSPs to really kind of scale up and service their customers. And even if it weren't such a shortage, these days it's just starting to get so prohibitively expensive. You can't hire another tech for every new client that you sign.
Yep.
So everyone's talking about operational efficiencies and automation. What are some of the areas you see these smaller MSPs aren't automating that is really causing them to hemorrhage that revenue so that they're not actually making profit?
I think the way that I like to think about this process is it's an X and a Y chart, where you think about how frequently are you doing something on the X-axis, and going up the Y-axis, how costly is that? Like what resources, and there's this hot zone on the top right. You want to really look at that and say, okay, high cost of labor and something that we keep doing over and over again repetitively, it should be the areas of focus. And so past that, you can start looking at, okay, well, this is something that happens 100 times a day, such as a password reset, something like that, where maybe there's some degree of automation that should be put in to address that. But that's the way that I like to frame it. And then from there, it's, okay, well, in the journey of the customer, no doubt, the first step always is onboarding, right? There's that's a repetitive process. It can take 40 plus hours of effort, and it's generally a level 2, level 3. That is a process that I see a lot of smaller MSPs, if they focus more on making that systematic, they can actually burst through that next stage faster,
processes.
because it's a gift that keeps giving, right? So if you start off on the right foot with that customer, you have the systems in place, preferably the documentation's being automatically updated, and from there, the rest of the team, left hand knows what the right hand is doing, right? And so that's to me is the first step, and then past that, it's what are some of the other areas? We look at things like doing the account reviews. Reviews with customers on a regular basis. Yeah, which for us in my MSP days was actually the best time to actually increase our MRR or our relationship with that customer. Those were actually sales meetings, really, in a lot of ways, because you get to hear about opportunities.
What's the statistic? It's 7 times more expensive to get a new client than to upsell a current one. So it sounds like if you can show an ROI on a regular basis, then it might be easier to kind of pitch that new next level of support.
There's the upsell, and there's also the retention side as well, like both sides, right? But the upsell opportunities there from a retention standpoint. Typically an MSP faces a situation where you start talking about tickets or what you've been doing, and after a couple cycles, your point of contact starts to get bored, and said, hey, this isn't giving me anything of insight, and so that's always a challenge. So how does an MSP provide something of value every time that they do meet, whether that's monthly, quarterly, and so from that standpoint, we see many MSPs focusing on reporting with really good insight that they can share with the customer, so they can show up and actually say, hey, you know what, this is how you can leverage this technology better. By the way, here's what we're doing for you, just to validate, this is the value that's there. But in that information should hopefully be some of the insight as well, that says, hey, this is something we should do better from a security perspective or from the backup perspective, and turn it more into a conversation and less of a robotic exercise. Those are always my best account reviews, when it was really, it's a talk like this. You know, you're
Right.
you're chatting through things, and there's a systematic way to go through it, but you really arrive at, oh, okay, yeah, that is a good idea. We should do this more, and you brought some data or information to make that, you know, process go further. So it's a layup.
Right.
So you can get that upsell.
Any more nuggets of wisdom that I haven't asked you about?
I mean, for, you know, my take on, you know, next year is 2020. It's the year of visibility for us. We think it's very important that an MSP has a clear line of sight to everything that they're managing. That we say from CEO to service desk, it should be easily accessible, and that's really that's what we think is important and critical, because then they can get to the insight and do all of the good work they can do with their customers.
Well,
So, yeah.
Joe, thank you so much for joining me
Yeah.
today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Kris.
It's been fun. All right, join us next time on It's 501 Somewhere.